you're something of a commentator on the subject of graffiti.
That's right.
So
yes.
Where do you stand on the debate about whether graffiti is art or just pure vandalism?
I actually think it's neither of those two.
Yeah.
It's a long story as to why it's not either of those. It's not vandalism for me because I don't think it actually damages the property in a physical sense. But I also don't think it's art for a lot of reasons necessarily. I think art is a very complicated category. I think of it these days more as entertainment, as a form of popular culture and entertainment.
Right. And certainly, I mean, there is evidence of graffiti as being amazing in its artistic nature. And we have some examples we'll just have a look at. So, I mean, that is fabulous. You'd have to be pretty talented to produce something like that.
Yeah, I think it takes a long time to learn those skills and develop those skills. And it's a sort of product of people who are very dedicated to their craft and spend a lot of time thinking about it and obsessing over it. So it's sort of something that comes with an obsession with being creative, I think, is what often drives a lot of graffiti production, is the desire to be creative.
So why would a person use graffiti as a means, you know, spray painting walls or whatever, rather than, you know, some other medium?
I think there's a lot of diverse reasons why people get involved with graffiti writing and why they choose the medium. Most of the graffiti writers that I've ever spoken to or have known, they typically say that they saw it somewhere. They usually saw a more impressive form of graffiti writing and it just kind of spoke to them and they were hooked from that moment. So I think it's still a bit of a mystery as to what it is that engages people, but I think it's something about its visual nature.
But you actually have been a graffiti artist yourself.
Yeah, I've been a graffiti writer since 1989 or something.
Right, so you must have been a kid then.
I was very young, yes, and it started off not so legal, let's put it that way. And then as I got older, I sort of transitioned more into legal graffiti and more acceptable forms, I suppose you could say.
Right. So how does a graffiti writer end up being a senior lecturer in criminology? That sounds like quite a big leap.
Yeah, well, I think that the academic work and the graffiti stuff is very much connected and they come from the same place. Both forms are about composition, craft, sort of creativity, and I often think of academic work as art and as creative. There's a style to it that you try and develop.
Yeah.
You try and develop a voice in that. You do the same thing in graffiti. It also happened to be the case that my graffiti background led to my dissertation work, so my doctoral work, and that led to my sort of first academic book on graffiti, so the two also overlap in those respects.
Right, so your latest book is a study of graffiti in New York.
Yeah, so this first book is about the rise of legal graffiti, as it's titled. So that's a phenomenon that sort of happened in the early to mid-1990s in many respects. And legal graffiti kind of emerged because the subway graffiti was sort of, the city clamped down on that. And I think one of the things that happened was graffiti just went above ground.
So they had to find new ways to do it because it took so long that you couldn't really do it in secret.
Because it was time consuming, yeah. And so the best way to do that, when the trains were sort of, you know, a lot more security was put in place, was to start asking property owners for permission. And a lot of them said yes. And so now we have legal graffiti. That's led to the rise of a graffiti industry. So now there's all these spray paints that graffiti writers have started their own companies, manufacturing or helping companies manufacture materials that are specific to graffiti.
Yeah.
And so that's now, there's all this new spray paint. You think spray paint can't get any more better, but it just gets better and better. It's incredible. You think you cannot possibly push this any further, but then they come up with something new and it just pushes the art form even further.
That's interesting because, you know, if I see a tag on a building, I don't instantly think, wow, there's a whole industry here, it's good for the economy, it's good for creativity and art. You know, we tend to go, oh, goodness, clean that off.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. One of the problems that graffiti confronts is that by by default, it's a very public culture, and so you get the best and the worst of it. I quite like the tags. I don't think they're that bad, but of course I'm going to be a little biased. But I think a graffiti writer looks at a tag or throw up in a piece and they think, well, either of those things can be good or they can be bad. So there's bad tags for me, but there's also good tags. I think most of the public say the colourful stuff is okay, but we don't like the tags and the throw-ups.
So there are different types of graffiti though?
So there's three basic forms in graffiti writing, the tag, the throw-up and the piece. And so the tag is basically a signature. The throw-up is the bigger, usually bubbly, basic letters done with two colours or one colour.
Right.
And then the piece is the more elaborate, colourful form.
Right. So when we see, I guess the graffiti that we see that we go, wow, that's amazing, that's the piece or the masterpiece, isn't it?
Most people look at the piece, the colourful stuff, and they say, oh, I like the colourful stuff. I don't like the tagging and the throw-ups.
Yeah, okay. So, and tagging is really just like, you know, kind of putting your signature there, isn't it?
Yeah, tagging started, its initial function was to get the name out there and around, but I would say within graffiti writing culture now, it's more recognised as artistic and creative as well.
Right.
So I see some tags and I think some look terrible because they're aesthetically bad, but then I see some tags and I think they're absolutely beautiful and amazing, and it takes a lot of skill to be able to produce certain tags.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of tags certainly around the city that they just literally say Bob, and you go, there's nothing that special about writing your name, you know.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the problems of graffiti writing culture, is that it's by definition it's public, and so it's unfiltered, and you could compare that, say, to music production, where you fortunately don't have to listen to every garage band, right? Because there's a whole industry that filters that for you. Graffiti writing doesn't have that quality to it, and so you sort of have to put up with the best and worst of it, I suppose you could say. Yeah.
So you've come a long way from those early days when you first discovered graffiti.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of, I feel it's come a bit full circle. But like I say, I think the same kind of creativity goes into both of these forms, and I think they're both about pursuing passions and things that I'm interested in, and it's good to have two spaces. I feel very lucky that I feel people are lucky if they get to pursue one passion in life. I get to pursue two simultaneously.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for joining us and sharing your passion.